Very pragmatic.
I call James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So it is my pleasure to rise in this third and final reading of the Climate Change Response Removal of Transitional Measure Amendment Bill. The Green Party is, of course, supporting this bill because it does move us one tiny timid step closer towards reducing our emissions. When I say tiny and timid, of course, I'm referring to the government's own analysis that this will reduce our emissions by 0.7% in the year 2020, 3 years from now. And that is against a rise over the course of the next 15 years of 96% growth in our emissions over 1990 levels. So it is going to shave a tiny amount off the enormous growth that is projected in our emissions over the course of the coming decade and a half. It really does not slow down the supertanker of New Zealand's emissions as we head towards, frankly, global catastrophe. Now, to give you some context, Mr. Speaker, our emissions are projected to increase 96% above 1990 levels by the year 2030. They have already risen 24% above 1990 levels. And since this government came to office, they have risen 19% above 1990 levels. They are now the highest level that they have been since 1990, which is, when we actually started counting. It is also the period of time that the emissions trading scheme has been in place. And I just want to reiterate the point that the purpose of an emissions trading scheme is to reduce emissions. What has happened has been the precise opposite. Our emissions have increased 19% in the time that we have had the emissions trading scheme. And that is because when this government came to office, they gutted the emissions trading scheme, they changed the settings, and they crashed the price. And one of the things that government members have said several times tonight is that the reason why they're phasing in this tiny measure over the course of 3 years is because of the cost to business. Well, they thought nothing of the cost to business when they changed the settings on the emissions trading scheme and they crashed the price of units. Hundreds of millions of dollars was wiped off the value in the forestry sector overnight by this government. There were stranded assets up and down the country, hundreds of millions of dollars. The cost to the Māori economy alone, was $500 million. You had iwi businesses up and down the country that lost $500 million because this government changed the settings on the emissions trading scheme and crashed the price. So when they get up and they say, oh, well, it's going to take us 3 years to phase in the removal of the 2-for-1 subsidy because of the cost of business, they have got no idea of the catastrophic damage that they caused to the forestry sector and to iwi businesses around New Zealand when they introduced that policy. They say that they're friendly to business, but the cost to business of this bill will go nowhere near the cost to business that they created when they crashed the price in the first place 8 years ago. Mr. Speaker, during the course of the debate tonight, there have been a number of speeches from the government benches which have talked not just about the cost of implementing this bill, but also no comprehension of the cost of not implementing the bill. No comprehension of the cost of doing nothing as we have done nothing over the course of the past 2.5 decades to arrest climate change. And when you look at the costs that are mounting up to our businesses already, they are staggering. It is millions upon millions of dollars in costs that are already occurring. We've always thought, I think, about climate change as this thing that happens in the future, to somebody else, to polar bears in the Arctic, in the future. In fact, the costs are being felt now by us here in this country and in our closest Pacific neighbours, where people are already having to relocate to higher ground because rising seas are swallowing up their homes. And we will see the same kind of thing in New Zealand, in South Dunedin, and in Napier, and in Tauranga, and in the Kapiti Coast, and many other low-lying areas around the country. So the idea that trying to do something to reduce our emissions carries with it some kind of unacceptable cost is not stacked up on a business case basis against what is already starting to happen and the costs that are being imposed as our infrastructure gets flooded, as roads go underwater, as we have extended longer, deeper droughts, more frequent droughts, so the cost to our agricultural sector of that. The last great...
Sorry to interrupt the member, but the time has come for me to leave the chair. The House will resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Nō reira, good night and good luck.